you to our second online discussion in a series with an amazing panel of speakers for a deep dive on the fight against gas infrastructure in New York. And we're going to hear from local organizers in Brownsville and across Brooklyn who are at the front lines of the North Brooklyn Pipeline construction. Each speaker will share their unique perspective on how the pipeline will impact their communities, look at renewable energy systems that have successfully been organized in Brownsville and the Rockaways in the past, and examine energy efficiency, racial and climate justice, and grassroots people power solutions for the future. So as I mentioned, we're going to have a Q&A at the end where the presenters, with the presenters, and you can write your questions in the chat and we can get to them. So we're going to get started. First up, we have Anna Tsomo Leidecker. So Anna is a CUNY Baccalaureate student at Macaulay Honors College, majoring in wellness, equity, anthropology, and health sciences. She recently began pursuing her degree in public health and lives 1 block away from the site of construction of the North Brooklyn Pipeline in Brownsville. And Anna is currently our fabulous intern at Sane Energy Project. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Anna Tsomo Leidecker. As Monica said, I'm a CUNY student. I recently started studying public health. And I do, in fact, live 1 block away from the active construction of the North Brooklyn Pipeline. In fact, if I look out my window right now, I can see the orange construction cones out my window at this very moment. So it's very pertinent to me. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to learn from everyone else who's speaking too. And I'm ready for my first slide whenever you're ready. Thank you. Okay, cool. So this is an image from the first teach-in that I had the pleasure of helping organize in Brownsville. It was super inspiring. And I'll talk more about kind of the community actions that we've been able to do in Brownsville. But first, I should just give a little bit of background. I started studying public health this summer, and it was really wild because I started my public health career during like the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic in New York City. So I was like, whoa, I guess I chose the right field of study because this feels very relevant right now. And then also there's this other public health issue of the pipeline, which, as I said, I can literally see it out of my window right now. So those are the kind of 2 perspectives that I'm bringing. I live here in Brownsville, and I'm also a student studying public health. And another thing that's wild is that without one of my family members reaching out to Sane Energy Project, I probably wouldn't even know that this is what that construction is, because I think there in general is not a very high level of awareness around this issue in Brooklyn, and it affects so many people. So again, I'm happy that y'all are here today to learn about it. Go on to the next slide, please. So first I should say, what is the North Brooklyn Pipeline? It's being built by National Grid, right? That's the company logo. Oh, I think I'm hearing some background noise. Maybe just mute yourself, folks, if you're not speaking.
Monica, if you could mute others that aren't speaking, that would be great. I can't do it with my shared screen.
Cool. Thank you, team. So National Grid calls this pipeline the Metropolitan Reliable Infrastructure, right? And that sounds like maybe pretty good and something you might want, a reliability infrastructure, right? But we call it the North Brooklyn Pipeline because that's what it actually is. It's a pipeline being built through Brooklyn. If you look here on the map, you can see that it starts in Brownsville at the bottom. That's where I live. And then it goes all the way up through Brooklyn, through Bed-Stuy, a little bit in Crown Heights, Bushwick, Williamsburg, and Greenpoint. So if you look at that little red star at the top of the map where Greenpoint is, that is where the National Grid facility is. And pay attention to this black line in the center because that's the actual infrastructure of the pipeline. The kind of blue-green area around it, that's what we call the impact zone, right? So we'll go on to the next slide, please. This is an image of what the National Grid facility actually looks like. It's in Newtown Creek in Greenpoint, which is a very polluted area already. And what it is there's fracked gas coming from Pennsylvania, and they want to pipe it through all these neighborhoods in Brooklyn to this facility. And there's indication that it may not even be coming to New York City. It might be trucked out elsewhere. Go on to the next slide, please. I feel so fancy. Next slide. Thank you. Go back one more. Yeah. Back one more to the one that says sacrifice zone. Perfect. Thank you. So our neighborhoods are being called a sacrifice zone, right? That's the term used to describe these neighborhoods. And that's really, really significant because, as we know, Brooklyn is very heavy populated. A ton of people live here, a ton of people visit. And so this area, the blue area around the black line on the map that I was talking about, the sacrifice zone actually has 153,000 people that live there. So it's a huge number of people that would be affected by this. And this area includes daycares, schools, nursing homes, medical facilities. An interesting thing also is that information about this sacrifice zone, this impact area, it didn't actually come from National Grid. There's this independent organization called Frac Tracker Alliance, and Sane Energy Project worked with them to get this information, make a map, a visual representation of where the impact of this pipeline is actually going to be. But it's very high number of people that are going to be impacted. 153,000 people live in that area, and that's just the area that would be affected immediately. But we know that with fossil fuels and things that are dangerous for the environment, if it gets into the air, the water, the land, it spreads out even further. So next slide, please. So one thing that we know about gas pipelines is they are not safe. There have been instances of explosions in the past and leakages in the past. So in 2019, there was a similar project, a fracked gas pipeline, I believe, in Queens. And it was made by the same company, National Grid. And for that project, there was over 1,600 safety violations. So that's really worrying, right? Because those safety violations are the type of thing that can lead to risk of explosion and leakages. And the workers are not our enemy here. They're never the enemy in this fight. It's the corporation itself, but it is very worrying that a similar project like this had so many safety violations, especially because we know now the number of people that live in the impact zone. Next slide, please. This brings us to something that is very personal to me because I am studying public health. Fracked gas is dangerous for both planetary environmental health and also physical health of the human body. We talk about carbon dioxide all the time when we talk about climate change, right? CO2 and reducing our carbon footprint and that kind of thing. But methane is actually released from fracked gas, and methane is 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide, 86 times. And also radon is released from fracked gas, and radon is a known carcinogen. So these things are always important in terms of the health of the climate and the health of our bodies, but right now during this pandemic, COVID-19, it becomes even more important because so many people are really worried about their health right now, the health of their loved ones, their neighborhoods, their own bodies. And having this kind of thing in the environment, especially in the air, when we know COVID affects the respiratory system, that's why I have that scary picture of the lungs there, is really significant and worrying. Go on to the next slide, please. And this brings us to an important point, which is that this pipeline is an act of environmental racism. We know that climate justice is racial justice, is social justice, right? These issues are all intersecting, they're all the same. And a lot of people lately in government and in corporations in positions of power have been saying that they support the Black Lives Matter movement, right? But if these people in power actually supported Black lives and wanted to protect Black lives, would they be building this really dangerous, poisonous pipeline through Black and Brown communities? So we know from past studies, this study is from Mother Jones, it came out in 2017, that Black people are 75% more likely to live near toxic oil and gas facilities, right? This kind of thing happens all the time. Environmental racism is well documented, and once you start looking for it, it comes up everywhere. And this pipeline in particular is being built largely through Black, Indigenous, people of color, and lower income communities. These are the same communities that throughout history have been historically marginalized in the way that they have to bore the brunt of more polluted industry and infrastructure like this. Go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so this brings me to my neighborhood in particular. I live in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and this is one of the first areas that was being built through for the North Brooklyn Pipeline. So Brownsville is talked about in the public health world all the time because it's known that the health disparities in my neighborhood are very, very stark, right? It's one of the most historically marginalized neighborhoods in New York City. It also has a 99% Black and brown population. One of the most shocking pieces of information that I found out as a public health student was that there's 11 years disparity in the life expectancy of someone who lives in Brownsville versus the richest neighborhood in New York City, the Upper East Side, which means that if you live in Brownsville, you will die 11 years sooner than someone in a wealthy white neighborhood, which is just shocking, right? We also know that the asthma rates in Brownsville are the highest in all of New York City. We know that 66% of the children in Brownsville have asthma, 66%. We know that the particulate matter levels in the air are higher in poor Black and brown communities and neighborhoods versus white and rich counterparts. It's very clear when you look at the data that this is true. We also know that in Brownsville, 28% of the residents live in poverty and 54% are rent burdened, right? All of this information comes from a community health profile put out by the New York City government. Another piece of information is that we have way higher avoidable hospitalization rates in Brownsville. You can see in this chart on the bottom that the rates are much higher in Brownsville versus the average of Brooklyn versus New York City and the neighborhood with the lowest rates. Another piece of information is that so much of this premature death could be avoided if we had proper access to medical care, if we had proper investment into these communities, right? And the North Brooklyn Pipeline is just an example of putting more pressure and exposing more risk to this community where I live, which is already incredibly vulnerable to this kind of health condition, right? Respiratory issues. We saw from COVID-19 that so many more of the mortalities came from Black and brown communities, right? It's the same thing. People not having access to healthcare, people being forced to be in a more polluted environment because of systemic racism and because of a lack of investment in these communities.
And I have 2 minutes.
Okay. Next slide. So that was a lot of really upsetting information, right? But just to add insult to injury, it turns out that the people who pay for gas from National Grid, we're the ones that are going to pay for this infrastructure to be built, right? The infrastructure is not needed. There was a instance where National Grid tried to say, oh, we have a lack of natural gas or fracked gas rather, so we need to build this, but that is not true. There's enough. And they're only building the pipeline because it makes more money. The way that they can make more money for their company and their shareholders is by building this infrastructure. So just take like 5 seconds and guess how much money you think that they're making from this project. I'll wait 5 seconds. Next slide, please. $185 million, y'all. That's so much money. And I don't think it's just because I'm a college student. I think that actually is like an incomprehensible amount of money, $185 million. And that's just from the pipeline itself. There's other money that they're asking for to improve and expand the facility. That's over $100 million more. So it really is, I put the Mr. Monopoly guy in the slide just as a reminder that it truly is an act of corporate greed. That's why all of this is happening. And in the background, there's pictures of the flyers that we give out. And the top line says our risk for their profit. But it's not only our risk, it's also our money and our risk for their profit. So that to me is really a example of what corporate greed is. Next slide, please. Okay, so hopefully you're like me, and at this point you're like, what the heck? This is so terrible. what am I going to do about it? Okay, I have 3 very actionable steps that you can do as soon as you get off of this call. There's 3 things you can do. You can do it on the call. No one can see you. So either take out your phone or take a screenshot of the screen right now, and you can do these 3 actions. 1 is signing our petition to the New York City government. You can go to bit.ly/no-pipeline-petition and you'll find it there. 2 is calling Governor Cuomo. We've been trying to get people to call Governor Cuomo every day. It only takes about 3 minutes. You can leave him a voicemail. I've been trying to call him every day too, so I'm very familiar with this number. And the 3rd thing is send a comment to the New York City Public Service Commission. And you can go to our website, nbkpipeline.org/send comment, and it's like writing a short email. All of these actions should take 5 to 10 minutes. We'll go on. Hopefully everyone took photos and we can go on to the next slide. But we can post this elsewhere so that people make sure they got it. Okay, I have a few more slides. Thank you, Monica. Is it okay if I keep going? No? Okay, I'll wrap up.
Quickly, because you're over.
Got it. So we've been doing amazing actions in Brownsville, and this is something that you can do too. You can organize teach-ins in your community, whether online or in person. There's our website and our social media handle. These are images of some of the teach-ins that we have done in Brownsville. They've been amazing. We have access to, there's 3 community gardens all within a few blocks of where I live. We'll go on to the next slide, please. And I really only heard about this issue a month ago. I realized this while making this presentation. It was early July. The picture on the top right, when we're all standing on the street, that's the first action that I was involved in for the No North Brooklyn Pipeline movement. We did flyering, and that was in early July. And since then, so much has been able to happen in a short amount of time. On the left, there's a picture of this bioremediation project we did where we made mud balls to help clean the environment. Below that, there's a picture of a short film that we showed. Everyone watched it on their phone in order to maintain social distancing. It was very brilliant. And then to the right of that is a picture where we set up a table at a community garden so that we were able to give people information, flyers about this pipeline. So it's just been really amazing, the amount that we've been able to do in a short amount of time with a small group of dedicated people. It can feel really overwhelming when you hear how much money this is making for people, how bad the pollution is, you know. But I think the past month to me has really been a testament to how powerful community organizing can really be. So yes, that's my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna. We're all fighting for you and with you right there next to the pipeline. You all got to go and check it out and see what's happening there in Brownsville. Thanks, Anna. Next, we have Nicholas Shearman. Nick lives in Astoria, Queens, and has roots in Long Island and the Hudson Valley. He's working as a sane volunteer to fight for statewide just transition away from natural gas and fossil fuel infrastructure towards 100% renewable energy. Nick works in the community development field with a focus on equitable urban planning and public parks. Take it away, Nick.
Thank you so much, Monica, for the introduction. And hello to everyone tuning in tonight. It's great to be with all of you. As Monica mentioned, I live in Astoria, Queens, and I have roots on Long Island and in the Hudson Valley. And I wanted to, we can cue the first slide, please. Thank you. I wanted to start my segment of this discussion with a note about showing up for fellow New Yorkers and taking anti-racist action. And in this case, anti-environmental racist action. Although I do not live in Brooklyn, and although I do not live in the Brooklyn neighborhoods directly impacted by this project, I think it's vital that people like me show up and support the organizing happening in the neighborhoods directly impacted, and answer the calls to action of frontline organizers leading the charge on shutting down this pipeline and protecting their communities. And I think if New Yorkers are to truly be we the people of New York State, right? The act of democracy of New York State, I think we ought to think more collectively in making sure that all New Yorkers and New York neighborhoods have their right to a clean environment upheld. And this pipeline does not do that. It doesn't uphold the right to a clean environment of the folks living in these neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and it perpetuates our country's long history of environmental racism. The calls to action Anna just explained are prime examples of how even if you live in another New York City neighborhood, or you live on Long Island or upstate or elsewhere, you can show up and take action against this pipeline and help really spark the transition, the full transition to renewable energy. Next slide, please. So earlier this year, the discussion and the fight against this pipeline really ramped up. National Grid had been, I'd say, doing little to no community outreach about the project and little outreach to neighborhood residents and business owners. The talk was really ramping up, and Community Board 1, the New York City Community Board in the northern stretch of the pipeline route, held a meeting where National Grid presented. This was back in February 11th. And at the meeting, National Grid basically claimed that this is not a pipeline, rather it's transmission infrastructure that increases reliability in the system. Activist groups like SANE and our partners were at the meeting, which was standing room only, it was packed, and made sure to hold National Grid accountable. Next slide, please. This project, however, is indeed a pipeline, as you can see here. This is a picture of pipeline laid out before installation under the street. It's actually going under the asphalt. This is Manhattan Ave, just north of Moore Street in Bushwick. Next slide, please. And this is another picture that shows the pipeline construction in the street and demonstrates how the construction is impacting small businesses and residents. Construction takes up about half the street, and this is in the heart of one of Bushwick's commercial main streets, and this is a hub for the neighborhood's Puerto Rican community. Next slide, please. So Community Board 1 ended up passing a unanimous resolution against the pipeline at their February 11th meeting, which was a big win for the campaign. They cited many of the same reasons that we oppose the pipeline: concerns about community impacts on businesses, safety, environment, climate, and the exploitation for profit motive. These were all included in this letter, and this is actually available on the community board's websites in the meeting minutes from February 11th. So if you ever wanted to read more, you can check it out there. Next slide, please. We also had another type of victory, albeit temporary, in March. Sane Energy and other groups were really flagging that National Grid was continuing construction even as COVID cases were rising all across Brooklyn and the city. And this was around the time that New York started to shut down. We thought it was wrong that New York, that the workers were being forced to build this pipeline that we think shouldn't be even built in the first place. But so we were successful in advocating against National Grid and putting pressure on government officials to shut down the project for several weeks. The project has since resumed construction, but it was definitely a temporary victory. Next slide, please. And although the pandemic has forced us to modify how we work, we've been full steam ahead on the campaign against the pipeline and for renewables instead. Ways we've been taking action are calling Cuomo, as Anna was explaining before, to demand that he uses all that's in his power to stop the pipeline, writing comments, some forms of rallies, like we had a bike ride against the pipeline where there was a ride for the whole length of the route. And before the pandemic in February, we had a a large protest and rally that shut down construction for a day. Next slide, please. And woven through all of our actions and our case against the pipeline is climate justice and the climate change impacts of the project, and how the project goes against the goals of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And that act, which is commonly abbreviated as the CLCPA, was passed by New York State in 2019. It was made possible by years of organizing by over 200 environmental, social justice, and labor groups. And that coalition is called New York Renews. You can see the logo there on the slide. And Clean Energy is a member of that New York Renews coalition. It was a true people-powered campaign. I feel New Yorkers all should be proud of this legislation that was passed in our state. And the New York legislature passed it, signed into law by Cuomo, so it's the law of our New York State land. We did it, and it's one of the strongest climate plans in the world, definitely in the country, I'd say. Next slide, please. So to give a breakdown of some of the key aspects of the CLCPA, it codifies into law several greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, electric system changes, and environmental justice goals that the state is legally required by this law to meet. So we can hold them accountable to these goals. New York is required, getting to this breakdown, to have 70% renewable electricity by 2030 and 100% by 2040. 40% greenhouse gas emission reductions from 1990 levels by 2040, 85 by 2050, and 100% carbon neutrality by 2050 for all sectors of the economy. So that means transportation, building, heating, cooling, and cooking, electricity, and industry. There are explicit goals in the law for how much offshore wind energy and solar energy needs to be built in the state, energy efficiency requirements, and battery storage requirements. 40%, the goal that is really focused on climate justice in this bill is that there's a 40% target for investing the state's climate allocations, right? The money that it spends on all of its climate programs to disadvantaged communities. That is the phrasing in the law. And it can be no less than 35% investment in those communities. So those are the environmental justice communities that are disproportionately impacted by pollution or polluted projects like the North Brooklyn Pipeline. There are also air quality goals and program for communities facing air pollution to reduce that pollution. It establishes the Climate Action Council and the Climate Justice Working Group. Highly recommend you go Google those groups, and you can learn more about them on New York State website and what they're specifically doing for the law. Both of those groups have now been established. And if you're interested about understanding the nitty-gritty details of the timeline for the law and the steps government needs to take, I found what I think is this great timeline put together by the Catskill Mountain Keeper website, or the organization. It's on their website, and the link is right there if you want to take a picture of that. I think it's really wonderful and helped me understand it too. Next slide, please. So the CLCPA passed just over a year ago, but it's already affecting the outcome of pipeline fights. And that's why I'm really speaking about the CLCPA now in this presentation. This is a map or a graphic showing the Williams pipeline. You can see the red line, this is proposed. This was proposed to take frack gas from Pennsylvania through New Jersey, under New York Harbor, and connect into the Rockaways. This pipeline is one that we fought for several years because of the pollution it would cause in New York Harbor, impacts it would have on New York City communities, climate change, climate justice, all those things. And the climate justice movement had a big win in May, which we are all really proud of. Everyone should be proud of that. And New York State made their final rejection of the Williams pipeline. Next slide, please. So these are snippets of the quite long letter that New York State issued the company that was proposing this pipeline, the Williams pipeline, and it cited explicitly in the letter the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And it called out Williams that this project goes against the goals of the law and goes against the progress New York State is making to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. And it mentions fracking as well in that letter. Although the CLCPA was not the sole reason that it was denied, it was cited here, and we think that's a big deal for the law and the movement.
Nick, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, sounds good. So next slide, please. We oppose the North Brooklyn pipeline because it worsens climate change, just like the Williams pipeline. It negatively impacts environmental justice communities, and it moves us away from meeting the goals we set for our state in the CLCPA. In your calls to Cuomo, in your letters to the New York State Public Service Commission, I encourage you to cite the CLCPA and climate injustice as primary reasons you oppose the North Brooklyn pipeline. We really can't meet the goals of the CLCPA if we keep building frack gas infrastructure like this. We should, I think, abide by the targets in the law, which will take us to where we want to be in stopping climate change. We think that citing the CLCPA in our opposition to the North Brooklyn pipeline is a winning strategy. And it would be, if we stop this, or when we stop this pipeline rather, would be the people of New York's second major pipeline win of the year. Thank you so much. And that wraps up my segment of the talk.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was great. Call Cuomo, everyone. I'm going to put it in the chat, the number you can call soon. Thanks for that amazing reminder. Okay, so next up we have Gabriel Jameson. Gabriel is an advocate for social and economic development in Brownsville. He was appointed to Brooklyn Community Board 16 by the borough president and serves on the committees on parks and recreation, public safety, and youth services planning. Gabriel is also an ambassador of the LOVE campaign, and he coordinated a program called Solar Pioneers, which educates Brownsville youth on renewable energy and provides job training in the solar energy industry. And they were able to reach out to 2,000 Brownsville households, out of which more than 300 transitioned to solar energy. Gabe, tell us all about it.
Hey everyone, this is Gabriel Jameson. Thank you, Monica. How are you? So this is really personal to me because I'm born and raised in Brownsville. So I'm an environmental activist in Brownsville. I went to CUNY school. I went to CUNY Baccalaureate College. I graduated in 2019. And this is really passionate. Environmental justice is really passionate to me. What made me got into this work was a program called Solar Pioneer. And Solar Pioneer was a program which we trained volunteer young kids, and we trained them into sales and marketing workforce development in the energy, in the solar energy sector. And we trained them to do outreach for the community of Brownsville and East New York, where we transition homeowners, Nehemiah homeowners, into going solar. That was great. What Solar Pioneer brought to the community was access to community of colors, a new concept of energy. This is really important because we're so used to having fossil fuel. We didn't even know we didn't know what was a new resources of energy. So this was a new concept. It's especially important that we have conversations about equity. About equality, because equality should be focused on the conversation of access, and access is instrumental for the conversation of quality. When I think about this program, I just think about the work that the young men did. If you see my kids on the screen, Magali, Franca, some of the kids that was in the program, and a lot of these kids, it's like, what access means is giving people knowledge, opportunity, and skills. That's what access is. And when you're transitioning these people into something new, it builds something greater. So with Solar Pioneer, by doing this, we open up the minds of the young people, and the young people went out there and they campaigned the community and bringing awareness about the environmental issues in the community, bringing awareness about solar energy. What we did, we had people like Miles Leonard and Joel Sol that came into the community, came into my program and taught the young kids. And what's really important about that representation matters in community. Miles Leonard is a doctor at Yale University, PhD in environmental policy or environmental engineer, I can't really remember. And Joel just got into Princeton University. By young black men and women of color, seeing role models like that, telling them about environmental stuff, environmental renewable energy, and environmental justice that's in the community, it gave them hope and gave them another idea of what they can become besides the stereotypical of what they think black young men should be, or whatever the stereotypical basketball players, football players. I had a student that was in my program that it really touched my heart, where the student sat there told me that she wants to become an environmental policymaker because of the access we brought to this. She was aware, she wanted Miles to be her mentor because she was so engaged about how the environment affects her community, and how can she be involved into stopping the environmental climate change in our community. So when you think about things like this is really essential for communities of color, and it really shows representation. What those kids got out of this program was so essential, where they now can think about, oh, I can do this now. Like, I can do this. I'm aware. That's what it comes down to. It's not really about what you can do. It's that they're aware that there are more other possibilities out there in community. And what we really did was, besides educating the community and doing the campaign, what we really did, the kids left what's the word I'm using for? They left a legacy in the community. They can sit there and say that they solarized not 2,000 homes, 3,000 to 4,000 homes near my houses in Brownsville in East New York. That's what the kids did. And that's just remarkable work. And it was blood, sweat, and tears. And we needed people like Steve Elliott, that was a part of Solar Vessel, that came in and taught the young kids, and the kids was really accepted by him. So that was really important. But I think overall about solar energy and the pipeline is, when you give people access and opportunity to do things, they can grow. They can grow to the farther of their imagination. They can plan. They can. I'm not trying to say plan, but they can actually. Leadership reflects culture, and what I'm trying to really say is they have new ideas of role models, what they can be. So that was really important about Solar Pioneer, and how did it affect these kids? I think what Leonard, Miles did, and what Joel did for those young kids, it changed their life for good. And obviously it shows, because look at the work the kids did. I can't take credit for it. We have to really give it to the young men and women. The young men and women was the people that sat there without and solarized all these houses, these 3,000 to 4,000 EMI houses. And it was hard work, but they did it, and they was young kids. And that's when we realized these kids are the vehicle to the future. It wasn't about the money aspect that they got, the little stipend. It was like, oh, okay, like, whoa, this is about a stipend, but hey, this is more about what's going on in our community. So that's what I think about when I think of Solar Pioneer. That work was really good about how can we push the needle forward. I think we have to, in community of colors like Brownsville, East New York, and any community of color that deals with environmental racism, I think we have to ask ourselves, the reason why I get into this type of work is because I think I want to live and I want to give. And the only way you can live and give is to live right, you have to live right, you have to be able to accept things, but you can't live right if you're dying on the inside. And I think what Solar Pioneer did touched on something that we should have did long time ago. A young man in my community named Brandon, I don't like to talk about it so much, but Brandon passed away from asthma. And when we think about Brandon, I was really young. I was like 10 years old or younger than, let's say Brandon was younger than me. I remember because I was a kid at the time. Brandon had asthma. It's a lot of things that affect my community: crime, poverty, all type of stuff. But when I think about if we created policy, or we had Solar Pioneer way before, and we had solarized all of Brownsville, all of the nitrogen development, Brandon wanted to have asthma. And the asthma that he had was only based on the environment that we come from. You come from communities like Brownsville, ECO, where 66% of the people in this goddamn community have asthma. Something's wrong. But what Solar Pioneer did was, when you put solar panels on the roof of your house, 700 tons of carbon dioxide goes away, so we get fresher air. So I'm just like, imagine what we could have built for the community if we had policy like that. And that's not just that's just one aspect of it, but like Brandon could have been alive, and that's actually proven because we didn't have no environmental policies in place. We didn't have policies like the Green New Deal in place, and it affects communities of color like Brownsville, East New York. So that's really touching to me. And then when I think about the air pollution in this community, fun fact, 0.8. The air pollution in this community is so bad it's not even funny. It's 0.8. That's dangerous. The air you're breathing is dangerous. You're not supposed to be breathing this type of air. But what we did was push the needle forward, and we put solar panels to 3,000, 4,000 homes in Brownsville and East New York. But the work is not done now. We have to keep going, and we have to create we have to create what's the next step after Solar Pioneer. That was good work, and we're gonna continue doing solar work. But the next step is creating policies. We have to be holding people accountable, like the officials. And like Anna said before, like, if Black Lives Matter to our elected officials, we need to be active by environmental racists, because this pipeline is jeopardizing all of us. And policy is the key to move people up through social mobility to fight for people. If we don't have no policy in place, where are we going? We're not going nowhere. You can have all the money in the world, but policy is not in place. Policy tells you where the money's really going. And if we don't invest, that's what this community deals with. The reason why the community is impoverished is because it's no investment in the community, and it's no investment in the community. So going forward, we think about solutions like, hey, policy, that's one step. Solar Pioneer was the first step, but policy is a second. Green New Deal matters. We need to implement that. Another thing, we need to be creating green infrastructure in Brownsville and East York, in all communities. We need to be building net zeros. We need, if people are going to be developing in our community and anything, you need to be dealing with a net zero type energy sufficient developer that's going to build infrastructure and housing from a sustainable point of view. And we can do it because other places do it. If you ever looked at California is the only, besides smoking weed, I don't smoke weed, but I'm just saying, they got weed, you get legalized weed. And besides that, in California, to build in California, you have to have, in California, they have solar policy. So their policy is based on, if you want to build, your building have to be solar viable. Or if it's not solar viable, you cannot build, because your building must have solar energy on it, on top of it. So that's the type of infrastructure that Brownsville or New York City as a progressive we need. And that's just one example. And it makes sense. Like, why don't we have buildings like this? Why don't we have, in Dubai, they have a sustainable city where everything in the city sustains itself: water, gray water, blue water. They have, like, the infrastructure of that is like so unique, where it's healthy for the community. And that's where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to a point in community where we're building and we're envisioning that. And then when I think about community as a collective, I just think from how can we build a brighter community? And how we do that is, like I said before, policy have to be in place. Net zero buildings, net zero infrastructure should be being built. How we design things. We should also be having zero waste shopping stores. Why is that not in place when you think about communities of color? And we should be implementing this type of stuff, because community of colors, especially like this neighborhood, have a lot of environmental racism. We can't live good. We cannot live well if we're dying on the inside. And that's what the bottom line is majority of these people do not have the time, but we have to be holding elected officials and elected officials accountable for what legislation they're putting out. And it deals with more the investment in the community. How do we reinvest from an economic and social standpoint? I also would like to address the benefits of solar. So by going solar, what did the community got? The community got from the kids, they got a $500 rebate. So they got referral. Then you got $5,000 off of tax assumption, tax abatement. Then you also save $20,000 from after $20,000. Just the fact if you're a Nehemiah homeowner, if you own a house, the value of your house goes up now. So when you think about that, that's just the financial benefits. The health benefits was we have fresh air. Like I said before, 700 tons of carbon dioxide goes away from the air because of what the work that Solar Pioneer did, those young kids. And I just think the hard work that they did, are we really going to go backwards? Or are we going to move in a forward? Are we going to move forward in the legacy that they did? And are we going to build on top of that? We should not be pitting, National Grid should not be coming in this community and trying to sacrifice us, like Anna said. And I'm not trying to be sacrificed. No one's not trying to be sacrificed. But if we're going to talk about investing, you have to invest in communities of color. That's the problem. It's no investment. It's no way to do this. And when you have people that's invested, we're just going backwards because we're paying a pipeline. Overall, this is what I really want to say to you guys about the pipeline. I think if Black lives truly matter, we have to be fighting, or everyone, because I think we like to, in community, we like to cherry pick. When does Black lives matter? If it's a Black on Black, or if it's Black on cop, Black lives matter. Black lives matter 24/7. It matters in everything. Trans women, Black women, all type of everything. Black dreams matter. Everything Black matters. And when it comes down to disenfranchised people of Black and brown community, and this is a time where it shows you, are you going to be a coward, or are you going to stand up and fight with us to get this out of our community? Or are we just going to use our identity politics to say, oh, it's okay, it's okay. But this is really essential because environmental racism is going to kill us. The risk of this pipeline coming into this community is we're going to get cancer. We already have enough problems here. We don't want this in the community. And when you come up with solutions like Solar Pioneer, and we come up with solutions for this, it works. So it don't make no sense for us to be going backwards, but we need to be taking the resources that we already have and get more resources and come up with more bold solutions. I think at the end of this, hold on, let me think.
Gabe, you have 1 minute.
I got you. I think in conclusion, I really just want to say, it's not about today anymore. It's really about tomorrow and how we can plant seeds of tomorrow, leaving a better world and a better community for the generation to come. We need to practice sustainable love and through environmental positive practices. That's really the key at the end of the day. With the world certainly coming to the realization that climate change is poisoning us and dangerous us today and tomorrow, we need bold solutions. We need to protect our environment. The pipeline does not belong in our community and never has. We need more investment. We have to fight as a collective. We need to fight now more than ever. And it starts with you, me, and everyone in the community. So thank you for your time. Thank everyone for allowing me to speak about we have to do better. And I think the last thing I want to sit there and say is, I think we're at this point in life, we have to really be searching for a heart of gold, and people have to just do the right thing. That's what it comes down from a moral perspective. Do the right thing. And we don't have time to wait later on to do the right thing, and we can prevent this from now. And my community needs this. And you got to think about it. It started here in Brownsville because they're trying to sacrifice us. But thank you so much, anyone.
Thank you, Gabe. The true ambassador of love, everyone. Gabe seriously does so much. He's involved so deeply in the Brownsville community. It's amazing. Support him. He has a fundraiser right now in Brownsville to get a giant Black Lives Matter mural going and to bring more attention to the struggles and the solutions that people are bringing in Brownsville. So thanks, Gabe, for everything you're doing. I'll post that in the chat too. Next, we have Shii-Anna Mudie, is a Brooklyn native raised in Canarsie, New York. She received her bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Howard University and currently works in the industry as an energy engineer. Shii-Anna was fortunate to spend her formative years as a child at St. Paul Community Christian Church in East New York and a member of St. Paul Community Baptist Church. Growing up in St. Paul's equipped her with a strong foundation in who we are as a people, keen self-awareness, and a deep love for her community. Shii-Anna, welcome.
Hey everyone, how's everyone? Thanks for the intro, Monica. So I'm Shii-Anna, Brooklyn native, born and raised. Just really love that I could be a part of this, and as Gabe was talking about, help bringing solutions to our community. So you want to start the slides? Cool. So I'm going to kind of take it a step back for all of us. I know that most people are kind of aware that climate change is a thing, aware that we use energy to mostly like heat and cool our homes, but just tying it back to kind of fundamentals before we get into what are the solutions that our community needs. So for this national grid pipeline, this pipeline is really being built for heating and gas. So when you're heating your house in the winter, when you're cooking on the stove, that's what this infrastructure is going towards. And traditionally, when we're using energy to heat our homes or provide that natural gas to our stoves, we're getting it from a well or reservoir. We're drilling down there. It goes into production. It gets transmitted. And then it gets distributed to, like, whether it's an office building, someone's residential house, whether it's a school, university, whatever, what have you. And so what companies do is they make sure that that infrastructure is able to serve everyone who needs that heat or gas for their stoves. And the thing about natural gas is it is what we typically use today, but it's still not a renewable resource. So at some point we are going to run out of it. And it is still not, it's not as bad as what we're going to get into, but it's still not good for our environment. It releases greenhouse gases and it doesn't help us with climate change. Next slide. So I'm pretty sure everyone knows what climate change is, but just having the definition there just to put stuff in context. But essentially, climate change is just looking at like what were the historical net temperatures of our environment and how is that changing over time. And what we're seeing is that we are rapidly increasing in that temperature, and that is very devastating to our environment. And if it's not addressed, the world that we know it as today will not be the world of tomorrow. Next slide. So one of the main reasons why we're seeing this change in our world is man-driven. It's about emissions of greenhouse gases. And like that is the energy that we use, that is the natural gas that we just talked about, that is the fracking that is happening in Brownsville that we'll get into. That is all of these ways that we are using things that are attributing greenhouse gases to the environment. That's creating all these monumental issues, whether it's the rising sea levels, whether it's warmer temperatures, whether it's what we're starting to see in just crazy weather patterns, more heat waves, more hurricanes, more destructive hurricanes. All of those things are an effect of climate change. Next slide. And so kind of like as Anna had mentioned earlier, kind of adding insult to injury. So we do need energy to heat and cool our homes. That is correct. But the way that we are going about providing that energy to our homes or to our businesses needs to be addressed and needs to be looked at. As we said before, natural gas really isn't the best solution. It's what we use. But even worse than natural gas is fracking. Fracking is not a natural process by any means. It really exacerbates everything that we see in the community. I won't go through everything in this picture, but essentially what we're doing with fracking gas is we're forcing natural gas to come up in wells, unlike what we typically do. And we're using a combination of just like water and chemicals, forcing these like pivot holes into the ground and trying to release natural gas. And in that process, not only are we extracting that resource that we need to get off of, but this risks us of contaminating drinking water for our communities. That is an issue like Flint, Michigan. in Black and Brown neighborhoods. That is putting people that are already vulnerable at even higher risk and even more detrimental results in their community. So when we're looking at ways to provide energy to meet our needs, we need to do it in a comprehensive way that doesn't devastate the communities around us. Next slide. And Anna touched on this earlier, just the process of the process of fracking leads to so much more methane that is being polluted into the air. So it's not only that we're getting this natural resource that we need to get off of, we're polluting the air like at 86 more times the rate than we need to be doing that. And then at the same time, that's air pollution, and then there's also the water pollution aspect to it. As Gabe was saying earlier, how do we expect people in our communities to thrive and live when we're polluting them in this way? Next slide. And as one of the presenters touched on earlier is, you know, we recognize in New York that this is an issue, and New York made some very aggressive climate commitments, and kind of what that boils down to is emission caps for large commercial buildings, being able to replace what we're traditionally using, whether it's the natural gas or the frac gas, with renewable energy, with things that allow us to meet our needs without harming the environment around us and devastating our communities. And whether that's, you know, just renewable energies like solar, like Gabe's solar project, whether it's doing green roofs to kind of help with heating and cooling loads in the building. It's all of these more inventive ways of using the environment around us to help us meet our needs in ways that don't harm us, in ways that don't harm the environment. Next slide. And so when we start to think of kind of what could we do instead of using natural gas to heat our homes or provide the gas that we need for our cooking outside of solar, well, one thing that we can do is geothermal infrastructure that allows us to not only heat or cool, not only heat our homes, but also cool our homes in the different seasons, whether it's summer or winter or in your swing seasons like fall or spring. So instead of going and using a resource that is going to be depleted, that's already attributing to climate change or is making climate change worse, we're able to instead use something from the environment to meet our needs of heating and cooling our homes. Next slide. Monica, did one of the slides disappear about climate change in the Black community?
That's, Kim has the slides, so I'm not sure.
Nope, it went right from let's see if it's, it went right from here to here.
Okay. Oh, no worries, I'll just touch on it. And so we kind of touched on it earlier that in some of the reports that the Black and Brown communities are more susceptible to living in toxic environments. And so how does climate change exacerbate that? It's not just living near the toxic environments that create problems like asthma in our communities. It is also our communities being more susceptible to extreme weather conditionings and not having the infrastructure to deal with those disasters, like if anyone remembers Hurricane Katrina. We also have increased health issues that are caused by things like this. Everyone knows that COVID has completely kind of exposed what racism looks like outside of things that we may traditionally know it to be, but also in terms of health and environment. And so our communities are also more susceptible to suffer from food deserts. So you have this issue of environmental racism. You have this issue of using a process like fracking that just exacerbates climate change in our communities. And you have vulnerable communities that are already suffering and that already need a lot of infrastructure to become better. You have them putting them into an even worse position. I mean, who wants to imagine something worse than Hurricane Katrina? Who wants to imagine something worse than what we went through during the COVID crisis in our communities? So having an infrastructure with all these new policies that is really going to take away from our communities and put them even in a more vulnerable position, why are we doing that? Next slide. And so kind of touching on why aren't we able to implement on a more vast scale things of what Gabe was doing, things of putting up geothermal infrastructure in our communities? Well, because we don't own our own utilities as a public sector. We have private companies that pretty much decide what infrastructure is going to be built, and those decisions come from their investors and their stakeholders who may or may not be of the community. Next slide. So again, just touching back on, you know, all the different people who own the entire process, whether it's generating the energy that it takes to heat and cool our homes, whether it's moving that across wherever the energy needs to go, or distributing that to the end user, which is somebody in a house or a school or a hospital or anything of that nature. Next slide. And so, not to say that utility companies are not doing certain things to address climate change, but as we touched on earlier, we need to look at exactly all the pieces and what are we doing when we're talking about energy efficiency. And so what we can't do is ignore doing things that are not going to benefit the community and trying to kind of propose things like maybe it's lighting. Great that we're switching to LEDs, but how is that electricity generated? Was it generated by a solar farm or was it generated by frack gas? So in terms of saving energy, what are we really saving? Are we really saving the environment? Next slide.
Shii-Anna, you have 2 minutes.
Sure. So wrapping up, one way, maybe if you want to go kind of to the end of the slides, then wrapping up. So one of the alternative paths of doing that is having public power utilities. So this would be instead of a corporation with private interests that are kind of geared to their stakeholders and their wants and desires, putting that power back into the hands of the community, being able to, like as Anna touched on earlier, I mean, all of our rates are spiking up. For something that we don't even want in our community, we can get rate stability from public power. We can have access to more jobs that are creating clean energy with public power. And then we can also have policies in place and that are enacted upon that are more to the benefit of the people that live in the community than to people that may not have a stake in what's going on the day-to-day of that community. And that was my spiel. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Shii-Anna. So good to get the deep dive understanding we need to know about our power. Okay, so last but certainly not least, we have Walter Meyer, is an urban designer who uses ecosystem services to create resilient hydrology and energy systems, especially in vulnerable coastal communities. In 2006, he co-founded Local Office Landscape and Urban Design, LOLA. He holds degrees in landscape architecture and urban design from the University of Florida and Harvard University, and he is a lecturer at the Parsons School of Design in New York. In 2013, Meyer was recognized by the White House as a champion of change for his work using alternate energy as a means of immediate relief and an engine for long-term economic recovery after Superstorm Sandy. He served as an advisor to the president's team until 2016. Welcome, Walter.
Thank you. And Shii-Anna, thank you for that presentation, laying out the big picture on energy. It's really important that engineers like yourself are thinking through the space of renewables and away from the petro speak that's been causing a lot of misinformation out there. I also want to thank Gabriel, really admirable work with Solar Pioneers. And the project I'm going to show, I'll get to in a minute. I want to pick up off of what Gabriel is doing in the NGO space on Solar Pioneers to add that, my presentation today is about our professional work with our firm. I'm also an executive director of an NGO called the Coastal Marine Resource Center, or CMRC. And most of that work piggybacks on our firm's large-scale neighborhood projects by leveraging some of the resources from the firm to solarize communities of color in places like Rockaway, which is 70% people of color. After Hurricane Sandy, we energized dozens of businesses and community gardens for free right after Sandy, and scaled that up after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. We started a project in Puerto Rico called Solo Libre, which built on that work in Rockaway to deliver 180 community centers in Puerto Rico that are now off-grid and free of capitalism. They get $1,000 power bills every month in some of these community centers, and now they can reinvest in their programs and scale up their social cause. And I think there's a lot of energy at the intersection of social and environmental justice through energy, especially what Gabriel's doing, where he's seeing energy as a human right, resilient energy as a human right in communities of color. And Gabriel, congrats for stepping into your power and also for your humility. Thank you for that. So I mentioned the NGO. The NGO works around capitalism. Working at Parsons School of Design, we're working to reset the table for capitalism, essentially hack capitalism with policies that bring in climate adaptation so that we build our cities differently. And then thirdly, I operate with the firm Lola, working within capitalism. That is essentially recoding the DNA of capitalism, the pro formas, the economics of how cities are made through the development community with some of these resilient energy and coastal resiliency solutions. So let's start with the first slide. So for folks that don't know Rockaway, next slide here. Rockaway is one of 3 urban islands in New York State. There's 3 peninsulas and islands. There's Coney Island, Rockaway, and the city of Long Beach. The rest of the islands in the New York State are not urban islands, and they're not. And these are the 3 coastal. And I think it's important to understand that city meets the sea is a petri plate for climate change for cities worldwide. Next slide. And there's a lot of misinformation that geothermal energy is not feasible in New York. And I'm going to point to exactly where it is feasible. It should be the default energy source in addition to solar. And then there's areas of New York where it should be studied, may not be appropriate, but should definitely be studied and is part of changing legislation to require that you study geothermal first. But in the big picture, over 10,000 years ago, we had an ice sheet come down in the last ice age, and it stopped right about where the Long Island Ridge is. So Prospect Park, Staten Island, and the whole Long Island Ridge was the edge of that ice sheet. And the reason that's relevant is something that happened 10,000 years ago affects our calculations today on how to design the city. When you are working in a project that's south of that glacial line that you see in the slide to the right, that is what I call geothermal country. It is highly porous soils, elevated groundwater, low cost to drill and access water that is 50 degrees year round. 50 degrees is a great starting point when it's -10 outside, and it's a great starting point in the summer when it's 110 outside, right? So already just you're starting ahead of the starting line in terms of energy efficiency. It also means decentralization. You get all your energy on site. You don't need the grid. And the grid that Shii-Anna was mentioning, we lose 50% of our energy in the grid, whether it's energy transmission or sewage lines that discharge CSOs into our harbors, or gas lines that leak between the frac systems and everything else. We lose more than half of the resource into the atmosphere, into our lungs, into our bodies. It's a local problem and it's a climate problem globally. Next slide. So when you zoom in on geothermal country, when you look at this ridge through Long Island and Brooklyn, that brown streak that you see in this image was the edge of that glacial line. Essentially, the glacier scraped from north to south and stopped, and then melted, and this is all glacial till, means that the melt tilled this soil down to the south. And everything you see in red is areas where geothermal definitely works. You don't even have to study it, just drill it and access it. You look at Red Hook, you look at North Brooklyn, where the pipeline is, you look at all of Jamaica Bay and its environments, that 99% chance that geothermal is your lowest cost way to go. You know, call your geothermal expert or installer and get those wells in there. Before you go solar, you want to make efficient buildings, and geothermal is an efficiency measure. It's lower costs to get your energy from the earth on site. It also is a resiliency measure. If you have solar and battery with geothermal, you don't need the grid. You can operate independent of the grid. When there's blackouts, all your neighbors are going to come to your house for the party because you're a hub for the neighborhood. Next slide. And so that groundwater in those red zones is very low. It's 50 degrees every day, as I mentioned. And you essentially are extracting the groundwater and pumping it through the building, using a heat pump to either heat it up or cool it a little more. It can give you domestic hot water for your showers, gives you heating and cooling through the air. And architects love it because it gets rid of all the duct work that comes with an AC, because some of these systems can be just PEX tubing hidden in a corner, and they get full space to use rather than drop ceilings. Next slide. New York has a great energy balance. So this is now shifting to renewables in addition to geothermal. When you look at this yellow band up here, this is solar insolation. And when it gets dark orange in the middle, April, May, June, July, August, that's when the solar energy is the highest. And what's interesting about New York is when solar energy is its lowest in the winter, when it's shorter days, the wind energy picks up. So look at that green bar where it says wind speed. It's almost like this perfect energy balance that nature has provided for New York. And also New York gets 4 feet of rain a year. So if you need to get your water on site, you can totally do that off grid. The future is going to be decentralization, and I'll talk about that next. Next slide. The project I'm going to show you about decentralization is called Beach Green Dunes. New York Times covered this building because it's it's actually the largest affordable housing building that gets majority of its energy from the site. As close to net zero as you can get. Gabriel mentioned net zero. So net zero energy means all of your energy comes from the site. And it starts with efficiency, because you want a small load so you're not spending money on expensive solar panels. Solar panels are expensive, but you want to spend your money on passive house, like really tight insulation, and as well as geothermal, and then you spend your money on the solar. Otherwise, you've got a big solar array you have to build. But Beach Green Dunes is 8 stories. And in this slide, you see a tall building. The roof is covered in solar. The parking area is covered in solar. It's geothermal heat and cooled. We're capturing all the rainwater and reusing it either in rain gardens or in other ways. The rain gardens during dry times are lowering the groundwater. And keep in mind that groundwater is elevated because of all the leaks in the grid from the water mains. And so that's contributing to nuisance flooding in Zone 1 of New York. Zone 1 is the flood zone. Next slide. And if you want to see the New York Times article, just look up Beach Green Dunes, New York Times, and there's a slideshow as well as an interview about the developer that we work with to take incremental risks on this one building as an experiment to change in the way they build in their community, L&M development, so that we can use this test bed to build out a whole neighborhood. And for 7 years, we've been working on a neighborhood just south of this site called the Arvin East site. And we've had leadership from Donovan Richards when he was council member and now Queensborough president on this resiliency work. And without the political layer, without the community, pushing on this project. And without the open-mindedness of the development team and HPD, the Housing Preservation and Development, we wouldn't be able to have built the highest density, affordable housing, largest net zero building in the country. But here it is, you can go visit it. Next slide. So this is the roof of it. It's completely covered in solar. It's hurricane rated beyond the building code that's required today. It's passive house, which is a very tight insulation building method. Next slide. And it's solar everywhere. It's on the in the landscape as well. All of the paving is porous, so when the rain falls in this parking lot, it drops right through the ground. So there's another way of decentralizing is through managing rainwater. The solar also reduces the ice load on the cars and slip and falls. And when you use porous paving, it has better traction in the winter because ice melts when it falls on the ground, because it has a passive way of harnessing that geothermal energy. What I mean is the pores are connected to the deeper warm earth, and that warm earth rises up and melts the ice on site. So the maintenance guys are using less salt to add into the environment because of the porous paving melting it. Next slide.
Walter, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Next slide. The other piece is the landscape. It's an edible landscape. Almost half of the Rockaways environment has native plants that are edible, in this case, June berries. And that's important for health of the community, to be able to get live, fresh food from the site. And it harnesses rainwater for irrigation as well. Next slide. So this is Arvin Apartments, also in Rockaway. And this we this was a site that after Hurricane Sandy, people were stuck in the towers because the elevators wouldn't work. And keep in mind that PSEG has announced that they will disconnect Rockaway from the grid in a future hurricane to avoid fires. So that means all those backup generators for natural gas are not going to work when you need them. So the only way to get to this is solar with battery. So Kim, I'm going to ask you to jump forward to about 6 slides to the end of this, where we talk about the solar and battery piece. So this was one of the largest batteries at the time to be installed in New York. Next slide. And the batteries pay their way by peak shaving, meaning a big facility like this has to pay a commercial peak charge, which is different than a residential bill. On your residential bill, you pay about 20 cents a kilowatt hour, maybe $200 or $300 a family. But here they get charged for peak usage. So every time the machines kick in or the pumps, and they use a peak load, commercial bills have to pay for that. This reduces that peak load because it pulls it off the battery instead of the grid, and they save about 1/3 off their power bill. So the batteries pay their own way. It takes about 10 to 12 years for the battery to pay its own way, but it also gives you backup power for the elevators. So in the future, a lot of these senior citizens on the 20th floor will be able to get down even in a grid outage, which Rockaway has areas that are still without power today because of the Hurricane Isaiah that just landed. Last slide is here. This is the roof of the facility. This is SunPower, one of the most efficient solar panels in the industry, which allowed us to get just enough energy from the small roof of this tower to power the resiliency systems of the project. So leave it there. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the co-panelists for all the beautiful work that you're doing in your communities.
Thank you so much, Walter. Wow, I learned so much. I'm so inspired by everyone. I wish we had an hour for each of you. I think we'll give you all a TV show. So we're going to open it up to the public for a Q&A. So if you have a question, Kim is going to facilitate this part, and you can write it into the chat right now, and you can write it to a specific presenter, or you can write a question for anyone, and we'll see who wants to answer. And thanks everyone for joining us.
That was incredible. Yeah, if everybody would like to just type in the chat, that would make things a little bit more efficient for the time that we have left. So you could either, yeah, just type it in the chat, make it easier. And the way to find the chat is taking your cursor and just hovering over the bottom of your screen, and you'll see a word that says chat. And then just click on that and the chat will come right up. While we're waiting for, oh, Jean Belford from Rockaway. Costa talked about solar panels on NYC schools. Is this likely to happen? Who might be able to take that question from the panelists?
I take the question. I think anything can happen, but I think that's really deals with the city. That deals with legislation. Are we putting out legislation for people to solarize like schools? And it could happen because in Queens, Cortez was running for Queens borough president, and that was one of his things that he was talking about implementing. So technically it couldn't happen, but what it deals with is leadership. Are you bold enough to take the leadership to implement that for all communities? So it can happen because other local officials that was running for office said they wanted to implement it, but no one didn't write no legislation and push that type of progressive idea.
Great, thanks, Gabe. We have some from Polly Petra. Besides Cuomo, are there any other elected officials that we can start tagging and reaching out to? And also, if you are asking a question in the chat, if you have a specific panelist that you would like to ask that question to, just mention that.
I can speak to that. So Cuomo is the main person that we are trying to get our voices heard to. That's why we call him all the time. Also the Public Service Commission I mentioned before, you can send comments. That's also connected to Cuomo. So that's the main person. But now we have the mayor, de Blasio, because we have the petition to New York City government. And then also any local elected official that you have a relationship with or can speak to and get this issue like kind of in their mind. That's a great way to reach the higher up elected officials. So talk to your local electeds. It can be council people, senators, assembly members, you know, and all those people, they're supposed to represent us, right, as the constituents. So if they can represent us and kind of amplify their voice by using their seat as a politician to then speak to Cuomo and the Public Service Commission, that's definitely a good way to get our voices heard.
Terrific.
Good question.
Thanks, Anna. Tessa has a question for Nick. Are there more ways that we can petition for public power in our areas?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, Shii-Anna spoke a bit about public power in her presentation. And there's a broader statewide movement happening for public power. And the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, are really leading the charge on that. But we have a very localized campaign as well in New York City. I don't know the name of the link off the top of my head, but I could definitely look for it. There's a public power campaign website that the DSA has, and there are working groups, eco-socialist working groups, in a lot of neighborhoods in New York City. Like there's a Brooklyn eco-socialist working group. There's one in Astoria where I live, the Queens Eco-Socialist Working Group. And there are 3 pieces of legislation that are active in the New York State legislature. I don't know if they're going to be acting on them this year because it's unclear if they're going back in session or whatnot. But these 3 pieces of legislation are vital for that. So you can call your state senator, your state assembly person, and call Cuomo to urge them to act on these bills. And the Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie are the ones that would bring these pieces of legislation to a vote on the floor. So they are two main targets in getting this to move. I don't want to be too wordy. So anyway, we could follow up with the actual bills and what they do.
Great, thanks, Nick.
Sure thing.
Okay, Kristen, are there any efforts to make geothermal more attainable to all in New York that we can take action on?
Yeah, this is Walter. I just posted a link for that question. It's a toolkit from New York City's Department of Design and Construction. And it's a geothermal toolkit that gives you kind of pre-feasibility. And it's kind of intuitive enough that you don't have to be a technical expert, like Shii-Anna, but it's enough so that property owners or activists can figure out in their block where can they put pressure within their community to make geothermal happen, because it is the way forward. And the other thing everyone should be asking for is, how do we electrify buildings all around us? Your own building and your apartment buildings and your co-ops, or if you own a townhouse or a bungalow in Rockaway, whatever it is, every building should be electrified. Because once you're electrified, then you just put solar panels and you're free, right? You're there. So electrification means geothermal. It means you switch out your appliances. So instead of a gas burner stove, you go with induction stovetop or convection ovens that use infrared heat. I have some business owners, small business owners in Rockaways that are friends that are kind of climate heroes in that they've electrified their businesses. And the most extreme is Rockaway Bakery, the Rockaway Beach Bakery. Tracy, who runs it, has electrified the entire bakery. She's baking with electricity, and her power bill is only $500 a month, and she's baking some of the best pastries you'll taste in New York City. And then just down the street, there's a barbecue place in Rockaway that's all electric as well. So it's someone tells you can't barbecue and you can't make a bakery and you can't do laundry and all this and you need your natural gas, I'll tell you that there's tons of celebrity chefs that say an electric kitchen has more control of the food quality when they cook and less heated kitchens than a gas kitchen, which all of the energy is lost in the air and they have to put an AC and it's like a death loop, right? So go electric and then you can go solar.
Awesome. We have one last question from Brigitte, who is a wonderful volunteer with Sane Energy Project. Where is she? For Walter, it's a question for you. Beach Green is impressive, but it's a new build, and New York is going to have to do mostly retrofitting. Obviously, one starts with efficiency, but then what, particularly for large apartment buildings, geothermal would seem to be complicated, solar less so?
Yeah, retrofits are complicated but doable. Don't be afraid. It used to be geothermal. You need a big, huge truck to drive on site and drill the wells. Now they have these low little micro piles, they call them, micro wells. They've got a unit that can go in a basement. As long as you have like 5 or 6 foot clearance in a basement, they'll drill down under the building and extract it. It's really exciting technology. So yes, geothermal works for retrofits. You can retrofit a building with, spray foam insulation, closed cell spray foam. They're starting to put insulation on the outside of buildings and clad them. That part is easy as well. You get a nice, sweater around the building. And then of course, then the last part is all the appliances for efficiency. Then once you've done all the efficiency measures, you can jump to solar. But keep in mind, this is not an aspiration. This used to be, these projects that we've built are now becoming the standard, and very shortly they're becoming the law. So buildings over a certain amount of square feet in New York City that are being retrofitted, say buildings over, I think it's 50,000 square feet, can't remember exactly, and multifamily buildings, they're going to be required in the retrofit to increase their energy efficiency to a certain point, but then going towards the 2040 and 2050 threshold, net zero is going to be the standard. So we're kind of seeing the future in Rockaway of what will be the new standard of net zero.
Awesome. I did see we had a couple more questions. One for Gabe, saying great, from Brigitte, great program for youth development, really fantastic. but how were the 3,000 solarized projects financed, chosen, designed, engineered, etc.?
That's a lot of questions. Let me break it down. So the first time we had solarized that came to the community, Latrice Walker brought me here. The second time, that didn't really work out so well. So the second time we brought it, we vetted in our community because we realized we don't want everyone coming to our community and trying to just take advantage of the community. So we vetted a company called Vivid Solar, and it worked out. Everyone loves Vivid Solar. It worked out amazing. So what we did was we did like subcontracted. So basically we had the kids come out with the leads. They did all the lead work. They did all the campaign work. And then from those leads, the people that really wanted to go solar, we gave those leads to Vivid Solar. And Vivid Solar follow up. And then they would come with like the kids. And also the deal was with Vivid Solar, like you have to hire kids. We're not letting you in our community. We're not going to train our kids and give them a job after. What's the point of them having the skill and they're not getting a job? So we really want to empower in the community that these people get jobs because we don't have that many jobs in our community. So that was really an issue. But after we get done subcontracting and getting things done with the kids and getting things with Vivid Solar, the kids would go out with Vivid Solar and follow up with the last step. So let's say they met with the kids and the kids sign up. Yeah, they want to do it. From that step, Vivid Solar will come in, take one of the kids and go finalize the last step with them and go really sit down with the homeowners and be like, hey, X, Y, and Z, you remember Macaulay? Macaulay came to your house, blah, blah, blah. And the kids will actually learn the business technique that Vivid Solar will teach them with the one-on-one with the homeowners. So they got even more of a private, this is how you communicate with the homeowners. Now, Kim, what's the next question you asked me?
Oh, it was, where are we? How were the projects designed, engineered, chosen?
What do you mean designed? What do you mean by that?
Brigitte, maybe you want to unmute and ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Brigitte. This is Brigitte. I've got a rather deep voice. No, I mean, so you had this subcontract, and they actually went and so the homeowners, first of all, they entered a financial agreement. They essentially bought the stuff. Mm-hmm. So it was really a private individuals that did this, and you attach yourself to this, and you're the
we vetted them in the community.
You attach yourself to this company. Mm-hmm. I know it was something solar. What was it called? The Who Solar?
Vivid Solar. Vivid Solar. Vivid Solar.
Solar. I see. So essentially, they did a lot of the work of actually, if I may say, finding the homeowners, reaching a deal, etc., and then your kids work with them.
No, right? No. The kids did majority of the work, and then the Vivid Solar follow up. They follow up on the last thing. They did the closing, but the kids did majority of the work, and Vivid Solar just follow up and did the closing of the deals.
Awesome. We love Solar Pioneers. Gabe, you guys are so incredible. We're going to send everybody the follow-up steps, and there is a little film that we made of all the kids that you were working with on Solar Pioneers. I'm going to share my screen one more time and just give you guys the thing that Anna mentioned for our follow-up action steps. And make sure to sign our petition. You can find all that at the NBKPipeline.org website. And make sure to call Governor Cuomo. We will make sure to send out the websites of all of our presenters. And we also recorded this and we live streamed it. So you will be able to definitely watch this again and stay in touch with all of us. And we really appreciate you joining us tonight. Bye, everybody. Have a great night.